Imagine a corporation so big and so powerful, it has its own army, writes its own laws, and can even go to war with kings. Nope, I'm not talking about some company from the future. I'm talking about the Hanseatic League, a group of merchants from the Middle Ages who pretty much ran Northern Europe for centuries. So let's get into it.
It's the big question, right? How on earth did a bunch of traders, with no crowns or castles to start with, get that powerful? Well, it all started with a very common problem: pirates. And the way they solved that problem, well, it ended up changing everything.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in the Middle Ages, and if you're a merchant, trying to ship your goods across the seas in Northern Europe is, super risky. You're not just worried about bad weather, you're worried about thieves and pirates who would love to steal everything you own. To deal with this, merchants started teaming up into what they called Hanses. It's an old German word that just means a convoy or a group. The idea was simple: safety in numbers. But pretty soon these little groups from different cities started talking and realized, hey, if we all work together, we could do more than just protect ourselves. We could dominate trade completely. So how'd they pull it off? It wasn't magic. It was all built on a super smart, super efficient system. You can really boil their success down to three key things: their secret weapons that made their whole trade network practically unbeatable. First up, they had the perfect headquarters. The German city of Lubeck became known as the Queen of the Hanse, and for good reason. Its location was a strategic masterpiece, connecting two of the most important seas for trade. This was the nerve center where all the big decisions were made. Second, they had incredible technology. Now, this might not look like much to us today, but the Cog ship was an absolute game changer. Think of it like the cargo jumbo jet of its time. It had a flat bottom so it could sail in shallow waters, but a huge, deep body that could carry tons and tons of heavy stuff like wood or grain. More cargo equals more profit. This ship was a floating moneymaker.
And third, they set up their own bases in foreign cities. They called them kontori. These were basically little Hanseatic embassies of trade. Imagine a private compound in a city like London that was part warehouse, part office, and part dorm for your merchants. It gave them a massive edge, letting them store goods and make deals on their own turf.
All right, so they've got this amazing network, but what were they actually selling that made them so rich? Turns out it wasn't really luxury goods. They built their empire by controlling the stuff that everybody needed.
And their strategy was just brilliant in its simplicity. They would sail to the east and buy up cheap raw materials, things like timber, fur, and grain. Then they'd ship all that stuff west and sell it for a nice profit. But they never sailed with empty ships. On the way back, they'd load up on manufactured goods, like nice cloth or wine, and sell that back in the east. They were making money both ways on every single trip.
But their number one product, the one that gave them incredible power, was salt. We don't think about it much today, but back then, before refrigerators, salt was everything. It was the only way to keep food from spoiling. They called it white gold, and the Hanseatic League managed to get a near-total monopoly on it. If you lived in Northern Europe and you needed salt, you had to go through them.
So what did they do with all that salt? Well, they used it to preserve fish, specifically herring. The herring was a cheap, plentiful fish, and the Hanseatic League turned catching and selling it into a massive industrial operation. They had systems to catch them, salt them, and pack them in barrels by the thousands. They basically created a cheap, reliable food source that fed millions of people. If you control the salt and the fish, you control a huge part of the food supply.
Okay, so when you control the money and the food, your power starts to grow. It starts to move beyond the marketplace and into the world of politics. The Hanseatic League became so powerful they could push around kings and queens, kind of like how a huge global company today can influence governments. And they had a playbook for getting what they wanted. Step one was always diplomacy. Try to negotiate a special deal that favored them. But if a kingdom didn't want to play ball, they'd move to step two: economic pressure. They would impose an embargo, which is a complete shutdown of trade. Suddenly, that kingdom couldn't buy or sell anything. That could cripple an economy. And if that still didn't work, step three: military action. Yep, they had their own navy and their own soldiers, and they weren't afraid to go to war to protect their profits.
And here's the key to understanding their power. Within their own cities, the merchants were the government. The richest traders sat on the city councils, and they made all the rules about taxes and laws. It was a system set up by business for business. Everything was designed to make their trade network more successful.
But as we know, empires don't last forever. After hundreds of years at the top, the world started to change, and the Hanseatic League's tight grip on trade and power began to slip.
So what happened? Well, it wasn't one single event. It was a slow decline. Other countries, like England and the Netherlands, got much better at building ships and sailing. Then new trade routes to the Americas opened up, shifting the focus away from the League's home turf in the Baltic Sea. Plus, kings and queens were building stronger nations and weren't so keen on a league of merchants telling them what to do. By the time of their last formal meeting in 1669, the glory days were long over.
But their legacy is still all around us, if you know where to look. You can see it in the beautiful red brick architecture in cities all across Northern Europe. Some cities, like Hamburg, still proudly call themselves a Hanseatic city. In a way, they were an early blueprint for international groups like the European Union. And they helped establish business ideas, like quality control, that we still use today. And that leaves us with one last big thought. The Hanseatic League showed that a network built on economic cooperation can become as powerful as an empire. It really makes you wonder, what are the modern versions of the League? Are they the giant tech companies that control how we get our information, or the global shipping corporations that manage the flow of almost everything we buy? It just goes to show you, sometimes the greatest power doesn't come from a crown or an army, but from controlling the network.